Hello everyone. I'm going to be talking about William Blake in this video, specifically looking at an essay example from a past essay question from a few years ago. This is for students that are studying the political and social protest writing module and are interested or curious about how to write about Blake's poetry for a Section B response, where students have about an hour or so to write about between 3 to 5 poems of Blake. I think that's a realistic target in the time. So the question that we're going to be looking at in this video is about constraints and about whether or not Blake presents escapes from those constraints, both politically and socially. I've highlighted the key words in the task. That's important because it shows you exactly what the focus of the essay is about. And this is a typical question for Blake for Section B. It's worded as a quotation, and it finishes with a question about how far do you agree. You can fully disagree, you can fully agree, or you can do a bit of both. I've then given you a selection of 6 poems from the collection. There are others, of course, but I wouldn't expect students to talk about all 6 here. I would expect students to maybe do between 3 to 5 of them. So the most important thing for poetry is to make sure you pick the right poems. And the second most important thing is you answer the question. To use the analogy that I've used in previous videos, a good literature essay is like driving in a straight line. As soon as you veer the car towards the ditch, the drive becomes less safe or less successful. And it's the same with an English essay. You want to make sure that you're staying in one line, answering the focus of the task. So I would be expecting, if I was an examiner marking this paper, I would be expecting students to make it very, very clear how what they're saying about the poetry links to this task, which I have highlighted here at the top of the page. So I've given myself the mission of writing about 4 poems in this essay, and I've given you the reasons why I've chosen these poems on the right-hand side. Effectively, I'm using infant sorrow to agree, to suggest that this child is constrained not only physically by the swaddling bands, but also mentally by the kind of misery that is being presented by these characters in that poem. I'm using the chimney sweeper and the schoolboy to say that, yes, there are hints of an escape from political or societal escapes, political or societal constraints, but they can often be short-lived, or the character, the speaker, is not able to make use of those escapes. So the dream, for example, in the chimney sweeper innocence is temporary, whereas the schoolboy is forced to go to school even though he knows in the morning that nature offers a great escape from the prison-like classroom. And I'm using Laughing Song to completely disagree with this question and basically saying that the green world and the pastoral is a perfect escape from constraints. And the countryside in Innocence is often used as a depiction of that utopian equilibrium between nature and man, which is at odds with the suffering and debauchery and poverty that you would often find in London, for example, not just in the poem London, but in cities at the time more readily. So that is what I'm obligating myself to talk about in this essay. Okay, now this is an open book exam, which means that the examiner is expecting you to quote liberally and be able to talk about authorial methods with confidence because the whole texts are there in front of you. So the questions will often make specific mention to AO2, authorial methods, which means you've got to be referencing the texts and also discussing meanings and interpretations and connotations and all that kind of stuff. So the examiner says you should be able to do that because we've given every single poem in front of you. So you have enough to refer to is what they're saying. So with an open book exam, examiners like me should be expecting you to be quoting from the poems that you're talking about. Okay. So this is an hour task. 3 to 5 poems is usually a good target. So with this response, there is no requirement for students to talk about or to use an introduction. Sometimes they can be time wasters, and that time is better spent actually going straight into your first poem, discussing the topic that you've been given to discuss. Here, I've just used a sentence as my introduction, basically where I'm saying to the examiner, some poems present an escape, but also give me the opportunity to mention some of the elements that I associate with the genre of political and social protest writing, like oppression, suffering, and exploitation. So clearly, I'm also connecting these poems to the genre from which they come from. So my introduction is very clearly that first couple of sentences on this page. I then decide that I'm going to write a paragraph about infant sorrow. And with poetry essays, you can actually be very blocky in your essay structure, which is quite nice because it means you don't have to do anything too complicated with your essay structures. So one poem per paragraph is perfectly fine. In infant sorrow, a newborn child who has recently been born into a dangerous world, conveying a sense of fear and suffering. And since this child is very young, this seems to suggest that there is no hope for this infant because of the dystopian reality that society presents. The emotional reactions to the birth of the child, seen through the verbs groaned and wept, which describe the actions of the parents, reinforces the restrictive and oppressive nature of society, synonymous with the state of experience. The tricolon of adjectives, helpless, naked, and piping loud, suggests that the child is vulnerable and the parents are struggling to take care of the child. The child is left sulking at the end of the poem because it has not been able to seek escape from the misery of this world, and it is implied that it won't be able to either. Furthermore, the adjectives bound and weary have connotations of suffering because of entrapment, and related to how the child has been physically wrapped in swaddling bands and is unable to move its limbs, linking to literal constraint. In this poem, there is no sense of escape presented, and the image of two helpless parents cradling a miserable newborn is without any sense of remedy. In this sense, Blake seems to be suggesting that there is indeed no escape from political and social constraints. Okay, so the child is constrained emotionally, psychologically, and physically through this tightly wrapped blanket around its body. All right. And the parents also seem pretty helpless as well. They also don't seem to be able to escape the society that they live, which, based on the amount of woe that they feel, is probably pretty high. I have got some quotes in there, lots of short, perceptive, judicious selected references, which is great. And I've also got in there some terminology, but I'm not feature spotting line by line. I'm picking and choosing which techniques I want to talk about, which methods I want to talk about, to help me answer the question. Okay, so everything that I say for authorial methods for AO2 has to be geared towards actually answering the question rather than simply going through the poem line by line showing I know it. It's more than that. You're not going to get marks if you just prove that you know the poem. It's how you use that poem to answer the question. All right. Next paragraph is about the schoolboy. However, in other poems, there are opportunities for escape which provide glimmers of hope, even if they are not taken up by the speakers. For example, in The Schoolboy, Blake presents the tyrannical and entrapping force of the education system, which is reinforced through the rhetorical question, how can the birds sit in a cage and sing? That should say cage. Let me quickly change that. There we go. Not only are the little ones forced to go to school and spend the day sighing and in dismay, but they also have to endure the oppressive surveillance and authoritarian force of the cruel eye of the teachers. As a result, the poem finishes with a metaphor relating to harvests. Essentially, the education system is being attacked by Blake for creating nipped buds and blossoms blown away, as well as destroying tender plants. Here, the speaker is referencing how the education system is representative of restrictive and dogmatic institutions which do little to make people feel free. Interestingly, the poem begins with a snapshot of how nature offers the boy freedom from any political and social constraints, and this is where the language and tone of the poem is most joyous. Upon waking up, the boy notices birds singing on every tree during the summer morn, which is juxtaposed with the blasts of winter described at the end of the poem. In this sense, whereas the child is aware that the green world offers escape, he is unable to access it because of the tyrannical imposition of schooling on him. Okay, so even though he knows that nature is there and is a tantalizing hint of the escape and freedom that's outside his window in the morning, he can't enjoy it because he has to go to school and is forced to go to school. And that's where you get the references to the classrooms being like a metaphorical prison. Okay, so that is kind of, I suppose, agreeing to some extent with the task. In The Schoolboy, there kind of is no escape from political constraints, even though even though we know that there is a possible option of going outside. The next paragraph about Laughing Song. Whereas there are glimmers of natural imagery at the opening of The Schoolboy, another Innocence poem, Laughing Song, consistently depicts the pastoral world as harmonious and in equilibrium with humankind, and suggests escape from constraints is possible. The poem, which features consistent personification of different natural features, such as green woods and meadows, foreground the fact that the green world is presented as a viable escape from any kind of oppression. The repetition of laugh undoubtedly places the poem within the world of innocence. Here, human representatives, Mary and Susan and Emily, are unified with nature instead of being superior to it, and there is a sense that the reason for their happiness is because they are free from any form of constraint. So very clearly there, nature again as a possible way of escaping the constraints. And this poem would therefore disagree with this task. Clearly there is escape, and the green world and nature is being used as that escape. Finally, to talk about the chimney sweeper from Innocence, the poem uses a dream as representative of the child sweeper's escape from his miserable and exploitative reality. His work is what constrains him. In the opening stanzas of the poem, the sweeper describes how he is locked up in coffins of black, and how his innocence is literally shaved away through the cutting of his white hair. However, despite this incredibly impoverished and dangerous work, the speaker has a dream featuring an angel, which acts as a device to represent freedom from such constraints. Not only does the angel have a key and sets them all free, but during the dream, the children have fun on a green plain and wash in a river and shine in the sun. The more positive vocabulary here representing the cleansing ability of the dream, which enables the children to escape their grim everyday reality. Again, the natural world allows the sweepers the ability to temporarily escape from social constraints of their work, as well as giving them resilience to do their duty the following day after rising in the dark and going to work. As a result, this poem does show there is an escape, but as it's a dream, it offers only a temporary or imagined escape rather than something permanent. So it's an interesting discussion here that yes, the dream is an escape of sorts, but it only exists in the imagination, and that doesn't prevent the child having to face another day of this grim work in the chimneys the following day. Okay, but it does give him that sense of resilience and that sense of spirit, I suppose, in order to carry on doing his duty. It's worth noting that in the experience version of the chimney sweeper, you also have the phrase clothes me in clothes of death, and that also is quite entrapping. So you might want to reference that as well in this paragraph if you wanted to. So that is an example of how you may want to answer a question for Blake. Of course, this question probably won't come up because it's come up already, but you can still see the kind of approach to the question in terms of having a poem per paragraph, the amount of references to the text, the amount of terminology, the way in which the student manages to comment on authorial methods and key interpretations, and how the essay is constantly referencing the key word of the question, which is constraints or escape. And by doing that, the student is showing that the essay is being kept in a straight line, is on task, not going off on tangents, and therefore the examiner cannot discredit you because you are clearly answering the question that you are set. Remember, with poetry, but really any text for Lit B, this is not a case of going line by line feature spotting. Everything you say has to be linked to answering the question. So hopefully that was useful. Thank you very much for watching. Check out my Blake playlist on my channel. Lots of poems, lots of videos on there, analysing the poems, as you may know already, and also lots of essay examples as well. So thanks very much for watching, and good luck in your studies. Thank you.